Rain slid off the brim of Officer Nate Callahan's patrol cap as his cruiser crept along the edge of Maple Glen's Birchwood Park. The windshield wipers beat a slow, tired rhythm, matching the weight in his chest. It was past midnight. The town was quiet but not still. Nate had worked enough late shifts to know quiet didn't always mean safe. Beside him in the front seat sat Thor, his K-9 partner. 6 years old, German Shepherd, former military working dog discharged after his handler was killed overseas. Since then, Thor had been assigned to Nate, both a transfer, both carrying ghosts. Thor sat upright, alert, his head turned sharply to the left. Nate followed his gaze. On a stone bench beneath the sagging willow trees, in a patch of dim orange from the nearby lamp post, was a small figure. Barefoot, motionless. Rain soaked her thin dress, strands of matted hair clinging to her cheeks. She looked like she'd been there for hours, maybe longer. Nate eased the cruiser to a stop. His pulse kicked up a notch. "Stay here, buddy," he said softly, reaching for the door. But Thor was already moving. Not disobedient, just certain. The German Shepherd pushed open the half-unlatched door with his shoulder and stepped into the night like he'd done it 100 times before. No bark, no growl, just purpose. Nate cursed under his breath and followed, hand instinctively resting near his sidearm. The girl hadn't flinched at the sound of the car. She didn't react when Thor approached, moving low and steady. She sat curled, knees hugged to her chest, feet red and raw from the cold stone. Her dress was ripped at the sleeve, her skin a patchwork of dirt and bruises. Nate crouched a few feet away. The girl raised her head. He expected tears. Fear. Instead, her eyes met his with a kind of hollowness he didn't know how to describe. "I'm scared, sir," she whispered. Her voice cracked like the wind had to carry it forward. That was all. Thor, as if hearing something deeper than the words, lowered his body beside the bench. Slowly, carefully, he placed his head on the child's knee. She flinched, then blinked. One small hand reached out, fingers trembling, and sank into his fur. Something shifted. Nate's breath caught. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was cinematic, but because he recognized something he hadn't seen in a long time. Trust. He lowered himself next to them, keeping his voice soft. "My name's Nate," he said, "and that's Thor. He's a good boy. You're safe now." She didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. "What's your name, sweetheart?" He tried again. "Lucy," she said after a pause. Just that. Then silence returned. Nate radioed dispatch for backup and a medical team, his voice low, calm. The girl's legs were shaking. Her skin was too pale. He slipped off his patrol jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She sank further into the bench, but didn't let go of Thor. "Did someone hurt you, Lucy?" he asked gently. She didn't answer, but her eyes filled and her bottom lip trembled. Thor pressed closer. In that moment, Nate knew this wasn't just another welfare check. This was different. This was something that would follow them long after the reports were filed. Minutes later, an EMT unit pulled up. Lucy panicked at the sight of strangers. She clung tighter to Thor, shaking her head violently. "Number, please. No more. I'll be good," she whispered. Nate stepped between her and the medics. "She goes with me," he said. "Let her ride in the cruiser. Thor stays. She won't trust anyone else right now." The medics hesitated, but the firmness in Nate's voice left no room for debate. Back in the car, Thor lay curled beside Lucy in the back seat. She held onto his collar like it was a lifeline. As they drove toward the station, Nate glanced in the mirror. Lucy had fallen asleep with her face buried in Thor's neck. Her tiny fingers still clutched his fur. He didn't know yet what she'd been through. but he knew what came next would be hell. Interviews, photos, reports, a search for a name, for answers. And he knew one thing for certain. This girl didn't need just another cop with a clipboard. She needed Thor. And maybe, just maybe, she needed him too. Before the quiet streets of Maple Glen, before Lucy Ray whispered through the rain, Officer Nate Callahan had another name. Special Agent Nathaniel Callahan, DEA Tactical Response Unit, Gulf Division. He carried that title until an October morning in Juarez stripped it from him, along with his team, his hearing in one ear, and the belief that doing the job right would always be enough. They had intel on a cartel shipment. Routine, clean, no civilians. Until it wasn't. Someone had leaked their approach. An IED hidden under a dirt road tore through their armored SUV like paper. Nate was thrown 20 feet, skull cracked, eardrum blown. When he came to, half his team was gone. The rest, what remained, were medevaced under fire. Nate refused to leave the blast site until he'd helped load the last body bag. 2 weeks later, while still recovering, he handed in his badge. The DEA offered desk duty, counseling, desk work in D.C. He declined. He didn't want noise. He wanted silence. And maybe, somewhere in that silence, a chance to remember who he was before it all broke. That's how he ended up in Maple Glen, a town with one stoplight and more stray cats than crime. But even small towns have shadows, and the badge still meant something. So he put it on again, a little heavier now. The same week he started, Thor arrived. The dog came from a base out of Fort Bragg, where he'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a narcotics and patrol K-9. His record was spotless. His reputation? Ferocious in the field. Until the mission in Kandahar. He'd been ordered into a compound. The handler, fresh out of training, missed a cue. Thor was sent in blind. Inside, he found not drugs or enemy combatants, but a woman and child. In the chaos, the woman screamed. The child lunged toward Thor, possibly out of panic. The handler panicked and yanked the lead too late. The child was bitten, not fatally, but enough to spark headlines, investigations, outrage. The army removed Thor from duty. Too unpredictable, they said. Too dangerous. No mention of the botched command. No hearing for the dog. Just paperwork and a return to sender label. He was sent to a shelter outside Raleigh for retraining, or, failing that, retirement. That was where Nate found him. He hadn't planned on a partner. But the department offered a small grant to pair local officers with K-9s to bolster community trust. Nate visited out of curiosity, and there was Thor, sitting in the back of a run like he was still waiting for orders. Ears up, eyes hard, silent. They stared at each other for a long time. He doesn't take well to new handlers, the staff warned. Good, Nate said. Neither do I. The first few weeks were rough. Thor ignored commands. Nate ignored small talk. They circled each other like survivors in the same lifeboat. But Nate noticed something. Thor didn't flinch at loud sounds. He didn't overreact. He didn't bark for no reason. He just observed, calculated, waited. So did Nate. One night, a call came in. A burglary in progress behind a closed-down diner. Nate took Thor. When they arrived, the suspect bolted. Nate gave one command. Track. Thor took off like a bullet. The man didn't get 10 yards before Thor brought him down. Clean, controlled, no injury. Afterward, the suspect sat on the curb, shaking. Thor sat 3 feet away, still watching. The leash lay slack between them. That night, Nate gave Thor his first name. The shelter had called him Tango. But that wasn't him. He was thunder without sound. A storm that didn't need warning. Thor. Since then, they'd become something not quite like friends, but more than partners. They shared silences most couldn't tolerate. They moved like they knew each other's thoughts. Nate had scars on his back he didn't talk about. Thor had one across his left shoulder blade, a clean line where a knife had once found him on patrol. Nate never asked. Thor never explained. But they understood each other. Still, there were days when Nate woke in sweat, heart pounding, the sound of metal shrapnel replaying behind his eyes. On those nights, he'd find Thor already at the bedroom door, head resting on his paws, eyes watching, not asking, just staying. And now, sitting in the police station with a soaked little girl curled against that same dog, Nate realized something. Maybe they weren't broken pieces anymore. Maybe, just maybe, they were becoming something whole, together. The fluorescent lights of the Maple Glen Police Department hummed quietly as Officer Nate Callahan carried Lucy through the front doors, her small frame wrapped in a blanket that swallowed her whole. The clock behind the dispatch desk read 12:43 a.m., but the building felt timeless in its stillness, like it was holding its breath. Lucy didn't say a word. Thor padded beside them, every step measured. His eyes flicked from hallway to corner, not searching, protecting. Behind the glass window, dispatcher Rachel Kim looked up, her expression instantly shifting from boredom to concern. She set her coffee down mid-sip. "She okay?" she asked softly. Nate shook his head. "Not yet. I need the interview room, and someone to call doctor. Adeline Reeves." Rachel's brows rose. "Addie? The pediatrician?" "She's on the county's trauma list." Nate replied. "She'll come." Rachel picked up the phone without another word. The interview room was small and warm, walls the color of oatmeal and a couch that had seen better days. Nate lowered Lucy gently onto it. She didn't let go of the blanket. Or of Thor. The dog sat beside her, leaned in, and rested his head on her lap. His tail gave one soft thump. Nothing more. Nate pulled a chair near the door and waited. 10 minutes passed in silence, then 15. Lucy never moved. Thor never blinked. It was as if they'd both made a pact. One would not sleep unless the other did too. At 1:12 a.m., Dr. Adeline Reeves arrived. 45 years old, red curls tucked into a low bun, white coat over a faded Duke sweatshirt. She moved with quiet authority, like someone who'd spent her life fixing the kind of wounds that didn't show up in textbooks. "Nate," she greeted with a nod. Then she spotted the girl. "Name's Lucy," Nate said. "Found her in Birchwood Park, alone, cold, scared. I haven't asked much." Adeline lowered herself to the floor in front of Lucy, knees cracking slightly. She didn't touch the girl. She simply smiled and spoke softly. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Addie. I'm a doctor, but the nice kind. Would it be okay if I sat here with you for a minute?" Lucy didn't answer, but Thor gave a low, barely audible rumble, not hostile, but firm. Adeline didn't flinch. "Hello there," she said to the dog. "You're the strong one, huh?" Thor blinked slowly, as if accepting her presence. "Lucy," Adeline said gently, "I just want to make sure you're okay. I won't touch unless you nod. Just a little peek, maybe." Lucy's eyes shifted toward Nate, then back to Thor. Her fingers, still tangled in Thor's fur, flexed once. Then she gave the tiniest nod. Adeline moved carefully. She peeled back the blanket, revealing bruises that spoke louder than words ever could. Finger-shaped marks along Lucy's upper arms, a swelling just below her collarbone, yellowed welts near her ribs, some fresh, some faded. Adeline's jaw tightened. She covered Lucy again and placed a hand on the blanket, not on the child. "You're incredibly brave," she whispered. "None of this is your fault." Lucy's lip quivered, but she said nothing. "Do you know where your mum is, honey?" Adeline asked gently. The girl hesitated. Then, in a voice so small it barely registered, she said, "She didn't come back." Adeline glanced at Nate. She was staying with someone. Lucy added, eyes down. Travis. The moment that name left her lips, her whole body stiffened, her hands trembled. Thor lifted his head and pressed it gently into her chest. Nate's gut tightened. He knelt beside her. Lucy, he said calmly, is Travis someone who hurt you? Her eyes went wide, her throat bobbed, and she shook her head quickly, like if she said yes out loud, he might hear her from wherever he was. Thor growled again. Not loud, but enough. Okay, Nate said softly. You don't have to say more right now. You did really good. Adeline packed her bag and stood. She needs rest and food, but more than anything, she needs stability. She's staying here tonight, Nate said, in a cell. In the break room, he said flatly. Blankets, heater, lights on. Thor's not going anywhere. Adeline studied him. Then she nodded. I'll file the report with social services, she said. But Nate, if Travis finds out we have her, I won't let him near her. After she left, Nate set up a cot in the break room. Rachel brought a small cup of mac and cheese, still warm. Lucy didn't eat much, but she took 2 slow bites. Then, silently, she curled up beside Thor on the cot. Her small fingers knotted into his fur like roots seeking soil. He didn't move. Hours passed. The building dimmed. Nate sat outside the break room, chair tilted against the wall, files in his lap. He read through every missing child report in the Tri-County system. None matched. Inside, Lucy whimpered once in her sleep. Thor lifted his head, pressed his nose to her cheek, then lay down again. By sunrise, she hadn't moved, and neither had he. By late afternoon, the sky above Maple Glen hung low with thick grey clouds, casting the town in a dull, static light. Officer Nate Callahan stood beside his desk, staring at the small collection of items they had gathered from Lucy. A threadbare blanket, a cracked pink plastic hair clip, and a torn fabric bracelet with faded purple beads spelling Lucy. But it was the drawing that caught his breath. Crayons, uneven strokes, childlike shapes. One big figure labelled Mom, one smaller one Me, and a third off to the side, hastily scribbled with jagged lines and a name beneath it. Travis. Over the whole scene, written in shaky letters, were 4 words. Please don't forget me. Nate ran a hand down his face. The kind of exhaustion he felt wasn't physical. It was the kind that lived in the bones, the kind that came when a child trusted you to fix something broken long before you ever met them. He folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into his coat. You ready? He asked. Thor stood instantly from his place near Lucy, who was now asleep on the break room cot. The dog's ears perked, his eyes alert. Nate didn't need to leash him. Thor knew when it was time to work. The lead came from dispatcher Rachel, who had recognized the beaded bracelet. Saw one just like it last week. A little girl was waiting out front of the Birch Hollow Motel, said she was looking for her mum. Nate had passed that place 100 times. It clung to the edge of town like a leftover story, forgotten and falling apart. Rent by the week kind of place. Mold in the walls, lights that buzzed and flickered, and doors that never quite closed all the way. 15 minutes later, Nate and Thor pulled into the lot. The motel was exactly what he expected. 6 units, mustard-colored paint peeling off the siding, curtains drawn unevenly, and a half-lit neon sign reading HLLWMTEL. Nate stepped out, eyes sweeping the lot. The gravel crunched beneath his boots. Thor leapt down behind him, nose instantly to the ground, tail stiff with intent. A man in a stained T-shirt leaned on the front counter inside the office, flipping through a tabloid. You the manager? Nate asked as he walked in. Unfortunately, the man muttered. What's this about? Looking for anyone who stayed here with a young girl recently. Name might be Travis. The girl's name is Lucy. 7 years old, blonde, thin, scared. The man blinked, then frowned. Room 4, he said after a pause. Couple checked in 3 weeks back. Paid cash. She looked rough. He looked like trouble. Still here. The man shook his head. He left fast 3 nights ago. Real sudden. Left the place a mess. I need the key, Nate said. The manager hesitated, then tossed it across the counter. You're not the first cop to show up asking about that guy. Nate didn't reply. He headed back outside. Thor was already at the door of room 4, nose pressed against the crack. The room smelled like mildew and old cigarettes. The blinds were bent, the carpet stained, and the air thick with rot. Thor moved immediately, weaving through the clutter like he'd done it 1,000 times. Nate scanned the room. Fast food wrappers, 2 duffel bags with the zippers half open, a coffee-stained baby blanket balled in the corner. On the nightstand sat a stuffed bear, 1 button eye missing. The fabric frayed along the seams. Nate picked it up and turned it over. A faded name stitched into the collar. Lucy. He crouched by the nightstand and noticed something tucked under it, a crumpled notebook page torn from a school workbook. It had crayon on it, drawn with urgency. The same hand as the first picture. This one showed only 2 figures, both small, both huddled under what looked like a tree or building. No names, no sun. Just the words scratched hard into the paper. Don't leave me here. Nate's jaw clenched. Thor barked once, sharp and low. Nate turned. The dog was at the closet door, 1 paw pressed to the floor, nose pointed at the baseboard. Nate stood and moved in. He opened the closet. Nothing. But beneath a pile of old shirts and cracked boots, he saw it. Blood. Dried. A lot of it. And next to it, shredded fabric. He pulled it out with gloved hands. It was a shirt. Men's size. Plaid. 1 sleeve missing. Blood soaked along the hem. Thor sniffed it and growled, quiet and deep, the kind that vibrated in the air. Nate bagged it quickly. They were heading out when a flash of metal caught his eye in the lot. Parked awkwardly behind the dumpster was a beat-up silver sedan, covered in dirt. Passenger window cracked open slightly. Thor pulled on the lead, nose twitching wildly. He veered straight toward the car, hackles raised. Nate circled to the driver's side and looked through the foggy window. Inside, a pile of cigarette packs, 2 crumpled beer cans, and a wallet shoved between the seat cushions. Nate reached for the door. It was unlocked. He pulled the wallet out. ID still inside. Travis D. Miller. As Nate stood by the car, heart pounding, a soft voice behind him made him turn. That's his car, Lucy said. She stood barefoot at the edge of the parking lot, blanket trailing behind her like a shadow. Rachel must have brought her. She shouldn't have. Nate thought, but it was too late now. She stared at the sedan with wide, unblinking eyes. Thor moved to her side immediately. She dropped to her knees beside him and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. Nate swallowed hard. The trail had just gone from cold to blazing hot. And now, with Lucy's whisper and Thor's growl guiding him, Nate knew exactly what he had to do next. Find Travis, and make damn sure he never came near her again. The call came in just after sunrise. A hunter named Rick Donnelly, out early in the pine woods north of Maple Glen, had spotted a man moving through the brush, unshaven, wearing a dirty flannel and dragging a black duffel. Rick thought nothing of it until the guy noticed him and bolted in the opposite direction. Said the man looked wired and wrong. Said he recognized the photo from the local news that morning. Travis. By the time Officer Nate Callahan arrived at the staging point, clouds hung low over the ridge, and the smell of damp pine filled the air. He stepped out of the cruiser and clipped Thor's vest in place. The dog stood still, muscles taut beneath the tactical harness, amber eyes scanning the trees. Deputy Lila Torres pulled in seconds later, boots already muddy. She was sharp, fast, a former Army MP with a calm presence that didn't crack under pressure. Nate trusted her. "You think he's desperate enough to hide out here?" she asked, slinging her rifle over one shoulder. "He ran," Nate replied. "People like that don't run unless they know they've got something to hide." Lila eyed Thor. "He ready?" "He was ready before I got out of bed." They headed into the woods, moving along an old logging path scarred with wheel ruts and half-buried beer cans. Thor led, nose down, tail stiff, body low to the ground. The scent was strong, fresh. Birdsong cut off suddenly as they reached a bend in the trail. Thor froze. "What is it?" Lila asked. Nate held up a hand. "He's locking in." Thor veered off the trail, weaving through brush and fallen branches, moving with uncanny precision. 10 paces in, he stopped and sniffed the base of a cedar. Nate crouched. There was a fire pit, half-burned logs, a few fresh cigarette butts, and a fast food wrapper still damp with grease. No more than 6 hours old. "He was here," Nate said. "Probably thought this was deep enough to lay low." Suddenly Thor stiffened again. He emitted a low, guttural growl. Not a bark, not a warning, something closer to a vow. From the trees to their left, a twig snapped. Nate turned. "Show yourself!" Nothing, just the hush of pine needles and a faint breeze. Then movement, a blur of flannel behind the undergrowth. "Go!" Nate snapped. Thor launched. It happened fast. Branches cracked, leaves whipped. Lila charged behind Nate, who tore through the brush in pursuit, gun drawn, boots sinking into the soft earth. Ahead, Travis ran like a man with everything to lose. Dirt caked his jeans, hair matted, wild eyes darting for a way out. Thor gained ground, slicing through the underbrush like a shadow. Then, with terrifying control, he leapt. His front paws slammed into Travis's shoulder, sending him sprawling face-first into the mud. A snarl, followed by a deep-throated growl, pinned the man where he lay. "Do not move!" Nate shouted, leveling his sidearm. Travis froze. Thor hovered above, teeth bared, ears locked forward. His weight pressed into the man's back. "I said, don't move!" Travis coughed, spitting dirt. "Get this thing off me." Nate stepped closer, gun still trained. "You hurt a woman. You hurt a child. You don't get to make demands." Lila arrived seconds later, cuffing Travis with practiced efficiency. "I didn't touch that girl." Travis barked, writhing. "She ain't mine. I ain't her dad." Nate's jaw tensed. "What did you say?" "You heard me." Travis spat. "That brat isn't even mine. I was doing Dana a favor." "Favor?" Lila snapped. "You left her bleeding in a motel room." "I never asked for any of this," Travis yelled. "I told Dana I didn't want the kid around. She just kept bringing her." Nate stepped forward, eyes cold. "You used them. You controlled Dana because she was vulnerable, and Lucy was in the way." Travis said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Thor stood watch over him until Nate gave the release command. The dog backed off slowly, breathing hard, but eyes still locked on the man, like he knew exactly what he was capable of. They dragged Travis back to the trail. The suspect barely muttered now, defeat creeping into his posture. Back at the cruiser, Thor sat in the back seat beside Lucy's drawing, the one she'd scribbled in the break room, the one that showed a monster in jagged lines. Nate looked at the image, then at the man now locked in the back seat. There was no father here, only a man who'd played the role of guardian long enough to cause damage and then disappear when it counted. Thor let out a low breath and settled into the seat. Nate glanced toward the trees. The woods had done their part, kept the noise down, but remembered everything. Now it was time for justice to remember, too. The corridors of St. Jude Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, the kind that sat too long on warming plates. Overhead lights hummed low, casting pale reflections off linoleum floors. It was the kind of place where time moved slower, where silence wasn't peace. It was tension waiting to break. Officer Nate Callahan stood beside Lucy in the elevator, watching the numbers rise. Her hand clutched Thor's harness strap with a grip too tight for a 7-year-old. She hadn't spoken since they left the station. Her face was pale, expression blank, but her eyes kept flicking to the red glow above the door. She knew they were getting closer. Thor stood between them like a wall, calm, silent, steady. When Lucy shifted nervously, he leaned slightly toward her. Not to nudge, not to distract. Just to let her know he was there. The elevator dinged. 3rd floor. Intensive care. Room 302. A nurse greeted them softly and led the way. Her badge read TINA, and she moved with the careful efficiency of someone who had seen too many broken families, but hadn't yet stopped caring. She glanced down at Lucy. "She's a brave little one," she said quietly to Nate. He nodded. "She's been through hell." Tina paused outside the room. "Her mother's stable but hasn't woken up. Internal bleeding, concussion, malnourished. We're monitoring her vitals closely. There's no telling how long she might stay unconscious." Nate looked at Lucy. The girl stared at the closed door. "She doesn't have to go in," Tina offered. "Yes, she does," Nate said, "but she doesn't have to do it alone." He reached down, palm open. Lucy hesitated, then took it. Thor walked beside her as they entered the room. The world inside room 302 felt colder. Dana Ray lay in the hospital bed, small and impossibly still beneath the white sheets. Tubes ran from her arms to machines that beeped in slow, metronomic rhythm. Her face was pale, cheekbones sharp from weight loss. Bruises peeked from beneath the gown at her collarbone. Her lips were chapped. Her eyes didn't open. Lucy stopped a few feet from the bed. Her hand slipped from Nate's. She stood frozen, breathing shallow. "She looks like she's sleeping," Lucy whispered, voice breaking. "She's fighting," Nate said quietly. "She just needs time." Lucy stepped closer, slowly, her sneakers squeaking against the tile. She climbed onto the chair beside the bed, then onto the edge of the mattress. Nate moved to stop her, but Tina waved him off. Her voice was soft. "Let her." Lucy lay beside her mother, resting her head near Dana's shoulder. She reached for her hand, frail, cold, and wrapped both of her own around it. "I'm here, Mama," she said. "I waited like you told me. I didn't forget." The room held its breath. Thor walked over to the foot of the bed and sat. He didn't lie down. His ears remained high, eyes locked on the machines, the door, the air itself. He stood guard like the world might still come crashing through the walls. Lucy closed her eyes. "Please wake up," she whispered. "Please." She squeezed Dana's hand tighter. Then it happened. Barely noticeable, just a twitch. Dana's fingers moved. Lucy gasped. She moved! She moved! Did you see?" Nate stepped forward. Dana's eyes remained closed, but the heart monitor spiked slightly. Her hand flexed, weakly, but enough. "She hears you," Tina said, a rare smile tugging at her lips. "That's the first time she's responded." Thor let out a quiet breath, one of those deep, almost human exhales that seemed to shift the air in the room. He stepped closer to the bed and gently rested his chin on Lucy's feet. The girl reached down with her free hand and brushed his head. "She's coming back," Lucy said. "I know it." Nate stood by the door, silent, the weight in his chest shifting. Not gone, but lighter. A knock came at the room's edge. Detective Mills, tall and broad with a clipboard tucked under his arm, leaned in. "Callahan, sorry to interrupt," he said low. "Need a word." Nate stepped into the hall. "We ran a background on Travis," Mills said. "Turns out he's not just a drifter. He's been flagged in 2 other counties, domestic disturbances, outstanding warrants. And he's not the girl's father? No relation?" Nate nodded slowly. "He was using Dana." "Looks that way. Controlled her. Likely isolated her, made her dependent, then started turning on the kid." "Any record of Dana filing reports?" "Yeah, she filed for a restraining order 2 months ago. Denied. Not enough evidence." Nate stared past him, jaw set. Now we have enough. When he stepped back into room 302, Lucy had dozed off beside her mother, her cheek pressed to Dana's shoulder. Thor still watched the room with that same unshakable focus. "She's safe now," Nate murmured, but he knew better than to believe that safety was permanent. The body heals slowly, the mind even slower. And trust, especially for a child, was something earned drop by drop. But tonight, in this sterile room with its machines and beeping and bruises, there was one irrefutable truth. The fight to save Lucy wasn't over, but for the first time, she wasn't fighting it alone. The morning after Dana Ray's hand moved in room 302, the world outside the hospital kept spinning, indifferent. Traffic hummed. Coffee brewed in diners. But inside the Maple Glen Police Department, Officer Nate Callahan wasn't interested in ordinary rhythms. He was sitting at his desk, flipping through a manila file marked Denied. It was Dana's original request for a protective order. The paperwork had been filed nearly 2 months earlier. Her statement was raw, handwritten in shaky cursive. Descriptions of yelling, of Travis locking her in the bathroom with Lucy crying on the other side, of bruises she claimed were from falling, even though she later admitted between the lines they weren't. Attached was a brief notation from the judge. Request denied. Insufficient corroborating evidence. And just beneath that, a name. A DA Rachel Geller, Assistant District Attorney. Case review closed. Nate leaned back in his chair, anger settling under his ribs like coals refusing to cool. He flipped through the folder again, slower this time. There were photos from the hospital now, timelines, statements, Lucy's drawing, Dana's condition, Travis's flight. The evidence had been there, not in clean lines or polished testimony, but in patterns, in fear, in bruises too faded to photograph. He looked over at Thor, who lay by the window, ears flicking toward every sound. The dog was always listening, always watching, always picking up what people missed. Why hadn't the system done the same? He stood and grabbed the file. Rachel Geller's office sat inside the Maple County Courthouse, a pale concrete building that tried to look modern but couldn't escape the 1980s. Nate hadn't spoken to Geller in over a year, and their last interaction had ended with clipped words and no eye contact. He walked through security with Thor at his side. The guards didn't question the uniform, or the dog. Rachel's assistant looked up from her desk, startled. "I don't have him on her calendar," she said, reaching for a phone. "She'll want to see me." Nate said flatly, "Tell her it's about Dana Ray." The name worked. 5 minutes later, he was sitting across from Rachel Geller in her corner office. Sunlight poured through tall windows. Awards lined the shelf behind her. So did a framed photo of her daughter. Nate dropped the file on her desk. "I want you to reopen the case." Rachel blinked. "Excuse me." "Dana Ray filed for a protective order. You passed it to Judge Kelly with a denial recommendation. She's now in a hospital bed with internal bleeding. Her daughter's been living in fear, and the man who did it nearly disappeared into the woods. The system failed her. You failed her." Rachel bristled. "That's not fair." "No." Nate cut in. "What's not fair is a 7-year-old drawing a picture that says, 'Don't leave me here.'" What's not fair is a woman begging for help and being told she doesn't qualify because her bruises weren't fresh enough for court. Silence. Rachel looked, down at the folder, then slowly flipped it open. She scanned the first page, lips tightening. "You've got more now?" she asked. "I do. Photos from the scene, hospital records, testimony from Lucy, a neighbor who witnessed Travis screaming and slamming doors, and Travis's own statement. He admitted Dana wasn't his kid, that he stayed with her for convenience, that he left her bleeding." She turned another page. "I'm not asking for favors," Nate said. "I'm asking you to do what should have been done months ago." Rachel didn't speak right away. Her gaze lingered on the drawing of Lucy's that had been tucked in with the reports. The same jagged shapes, the same words. "Please don't forget me." Finally, she said, "I remember this case. I remember thinking she didn't sound convincing, too vague, too scared. I thought, maybe she was exaggerating." "She wasn't," Nate said. Rachel closed the folder and sat back. For the first time, her voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "I have a daughter, Nate. She's 9. This hits different now." He didn't soften. "So what are you going to do?" Rachel straightened in her chair. "I'm reopening the case, officially. We'll charge Travis with felony assault, child endangerment, and obstruction. I'll personally take it to trial if I have to." A long pause passed between them. Then Nate nodded. "Good." As he turned to leave, Rachel added, "I don't expect forgiveness. But maybe I can still make this right." Outside, the wind picked up. Nate and Thor stepped into it together, down the courthouse steps and into the thin autumn sunlight. Later that day, the story broke across local media. Maple Glen man arrested after protective order denial sparks investigation. Nate didn't ask for credit, but when he saw the headline, he allowed himself one small exhale. In the break room that evening, Lucy sat at the table coloring. Dana's hospital bracelet now hung on her wrist like a lucky charm. Thor lay beside her, tail flicking with each new crayon she picked up. She looked up at Nate. "Did the bad man go away?" "He did," Nate said, "and this time he's not coming back." Lucy smiled, just a little. Then she reached down and scratched behind Thor's ear. "Good," she whispered. "He was scared of Thor anyway." So was the system. And maybe now it was finally listening. The first time Dana Ray opened her eyes in full, the morning sun had already crept halfway across the linoleum tiles of room 302. It wasn't dramatic, no gasp for air, no flood of memory, just a slow blink, a quiet inhale, and the faintest squeeze of the hand that had never let go of hers. Lucy was asleep beside her, curled in a half-moon against her mother's hip, one arm draped protectively across her. Thor lay on the floor beneath the window, tail flicking just once as if he too had been waiting for that moment. Dinah's voice came hoarsely. "Lucy." Lucy stirred, blinking blearily, unsure if she had dreamt it. Then she heard it again, barely above a whisper. "Hey, baby." She sat up straight so quickly the chair squeaked. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then she launched forward, arms wrapping tightly around her mother. "You're awake," she sobbed into Dana's shoulder. "You're really awake." Thor stood and walked to the bedside, resting his head carefully on the mattress near Dana's hand. She looked down at him, recognition flickering across her bruised but clear eyes. "You must be Thor," she murmured. He gave a soft chuff, as if confirming the obvious. By the end of the week, Dana was strong enough to sit upright on her own, to take a few shaky steps down the hospital hallway with Lucy guiding her on one side and Thor patiently pacing on the other. She had lost weight. Her voice trembled often. But she smiled more now, especially when Lucy told her stories about the night at the park, the bench, the quiet whisper, and how Thor had never left her side. "He protected me when I couldn't move," Lucy told her. "He knew I was scared." Dana cried the first time she heard that, not out of grief, but because, for once, someone had listened when she couldn't speak. Nate visited the next afternoon, a worn manila folder tucked under his arm. "She's been cleared for release next week," he told the doctor, then looked at Dana. "I've got something for you." He handed her a set of papers and a small set of keys. Dana stared at them. "What is this?" "Temporary housing, small cottage near the station, 2 bedrooms, clean, safe. It's yours until you get on your feet. I can't afford that. You don't have to. County Crisis Fund covered 6 months. After that, we'll figure something out." Dana's hands trembled. "I don't know what to say." Nate nodded toward Lucy. She already said it. The day they moved in, the leaves in Maple Glen had just begun to turn. The cottage sat at the end of a quiet street, with a crooked white fence and an old swing hanging from the lone tree out front. The paint peeled in places, the porch sagged, but the windows let in light and the locks worked. To Lucy it looked like a castle. Nate helped carry in the donated furniture, an old couch from the station rec room, a dining table someone had refinished, 2 twin beds with fresh linens. Mrs. Bennett from the diner brought over a tray of lasagna. Deputy Lila stopped by with crayons, pencils, and a new sketchbook. When they walked through the door for the first time, Lucy ran from room to room, opening closets, testing light switches, peering out windows. Thor followed, tail wagging gently. Dana stood in the doorway, hand over her mouth. "It's not much," Nate said behind her. "It's everything," she said. That first night, they didn't unpack much. Lucy fell asleep on the couch with a blanket tucked under her chin and the sketchbook open on her lap. Thor lay at her feet, one eye always open. Dana and Nate sat on the porch, mugs of tea cooling in their hands. Neither spoke for a while. Then Dana asked quietly, "Why did you do this? Go this far?" Nate looked out across the dark street. "Because someone needed to." Dana nodded, eyes glassy. "I don't think we'd be here if it weren't for Thor." "You're probably right," Nate said. "I've seen a lot of partners in my career, never one like him." Inside, Lucy stirred. Thor stood, stretched once, then padded back inside. He sat beside her as she woke, head tilted. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck, buried her face into his fur, and said something she hadn't said to anyone but her mother. "He's not a dog," she whispered. Dana smiled softly from the doorway, listening. "He's my hero." Nate stood behind her, quiet. They didn't need to say anything else. In a world that had failed Lucy more than once, where the paperwork didn't move fast enough and bruises weren't considered evidence unless they were fresh, a German shepherd with steady eyes and a quiet heart had done something no one else had. He stayed. And that, as it turned out, was enough to rebuild a home. Because home didn't have to be big. It just had to be safe, and filled with someone who listened, even if they couldn't speak. The day began like any other in Maple Glen. Sunlight streamed through half-closed blinds, warming the scuffed hardwood floors of the little cottage. A smell of toast drifted through the kitchen, and somewhere outside, a lawnmower buzzed lazily. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor near the couch, tongue pressed between her teeth as she leaned over her sketchbook. The crayon in her hand was worn down from use, its paper peeled back halfway, leaving orange smudges on her fingers. She had drawn 3 people at first, herself in the middle, smiling, arms stretched wide, her mother on the left, tall with long brown hair and a blue dress, and Nate on the right, in a tan uniform with a badge scribbled proudly on his chest. Then she hesitated. Her hand hovered over the paper. Without saying a word, she reached for a grey crayon and carefully began to draw the fourth figure, a strong, upright German shepherd with kind eyes and ears alert. She gave him a red collar and drew a little heart beside his name. Underneath the image, in wobbly handwriting and letters that bumped into each other like nervous neighbors, she scrawled, "This is my safe now." When Dana walked by and saw the drawing, she stopped mid-step. She crouched beside her daughter and placed a hand gently on Lucy's shoulder. "Is that us?" she asked, though she already knew. Lucy nodded. "Who's this?" Dana smiled, pointing to the dog figure. "That's Thor," Lucy said. "He's not just a dog. He's family." Outside, Thor lay in his usual spot on the front porch, chin resting on his front paws. He had taken to guarding the house without command. Every afternoon, he settled himself near the flower pot by the railing, eyes scanning the street, as if daring danger to ever try again. When someone walked by, a mailman, a jogger, even a squirrel, he didn't bark unless he had to. He just watched, measured, patient. That afternoon, a knock came at the front door. Dana opened it to find a middle-aged woman holding a plate of cookies wrapped in cellophane. "I'm Erin from down the block," the woman said with a bright smile. "I heard you moved in a couple weeks ago. Thought I'd say hello." Behind her stood a man in a wheelchair who gave a polite wave, and a boy around Lucy's age who peered shyly around his mother's hip. Before long, word had spread. Neighbors trickled in with small offerings, extra blankets, potted plants, hand-me-down toys. One brought an old radio, another a bookshelf filled with paperbacks. Someone slipped a gift card under the door with no name attached. The cottage, once silent and cautious, began to hum with life. Kids from nearby houses started stopping by, asking if Lucy wanted to play hopscotch or ride bikes. They took turns throwing sticks for Thor in the backyard. The dog, who once knew only commands in military tones, learned the joy of a simple game, chasing, retrieving, dropping it at a child's feet, tail wagging the whole time. Dana watched it all from the porch one evening, coffee in hand. She had lived so long afraid of the world beyond her front door. But here, in this little pocket of people who asked nothing and offered everything, something inside her began to shift. That night, she pulled out a dusty notebook she hadn't opened in years. It was filled with poems, song lyrics, bits of prose she used to write when the world still felt wide. She wrote again, for the first time in a decade. The next morning, Nate dropped by in uniform, holding a rolled-up poster board. "Thought Lucy might like this," he said. It was a laminated printout of Thor in his K9 vest taken during training years ago. Someone had added text in bold black letters: protector, partner, family. When Lucy saw it, she squealed and ran to hug Thor, who merely leaned into her gently and let out a soft grunt, eyes closed as if soaking in every second. Later that week, something unexpected happened. The town paper came by. A local reporter had heard from the diner about a girl who had drawn her family in crayon, one that included a retired K9 who saved her life. They asked if they could do a small piece for the weekend edition. Dana hesitated at first, but Lucy nodded. "Only if they spell Thor's name right," she insisted. The article came out under the headline, "From Shelter to Safe, How a Girl, Her Mum, and a K9 Built a New Life." It was clipped and posted on the bulletin board in the police station the next day. Several officers smiled when they passed it. "He deserves it," one said, nodding toward the photo of Thor. Back at the cottage, life settled into a rhythm. Dinner at 6, porch time by sunset. Thor always took the same spot near the steps, watching the road, listening for sounds only he could hear. And every time Lucy passed her drawing on the fridge, she'd stop and trace the letters with her finger. She had added one more word to it, written in careful red crayon beneath the original sentence. Safe. Finally. For the first time in a long time, the world didn't feel so big. And home didn't feel like a place you had to hide in. It felt like a place where even a crayon drawing could tell the truth. Where family wasn't just blood, it was who stayed. And Thor? Thor stayed. 1 year later, the little house at the corner of Maple Glen looked the same from the outside. White picket fence, yellowing porch steps, a red mailbox that leaned slightly to one side. But inside, something had changed. A new wooden sign hung by the front door, hand-carved with deep, smooth letters. Thor's porch, a place to feel safe. It wasn't just a house anymore, it had become a refuge. Run quietly by a local non-profit, Thor's porch was now a center for children recovering from trauma, abuse, neglect, things most people preferred not to talk about. But here, they didn't have to talk right away. They just had to show up. The porch was always open. Kids came in holding stuffed animals too tight or dragging old backpacks that barely zipped. Most said little at first, but they all noticed the big framed photo on the mantel inside. A grey-furred German shepherd sitting tall, eyes forward, a small girl's hand resting on his back. Below the photo, a simple plaque read, "He didn't talk, but he stayed." Lucy, now 10, had grown into the quiet role of storyteller. She came by most afternoons after school, sometimes with a new picture, sometimes just with presents. She didn't act like a teacher. She just sat on the steps with the kids, pulling from her backpack crumpled pieces of paper with crayon drawings, old photos, or her worn-out sketchbook. On a rainy Tuesday, Lucy sat beside a boy named Elijah. He hadn't spoken much since arriving 2 weeks earlier. His eyes were always down, and he flinched every time someone closed a door too loudly. That day, Lucy opened her sketchbook to a familiar drawing, the one she'd made a year ago. "This was me," she said simply, pointing to the figure with curly hair and a purple dress. He glanced over. She pointed to the dog beside her in the drawing. "That's Thor. He didn't say anything. He didn't bark. He didn't lick my face or try to play fetch like in movies." Elijah raised an eyebrow slightly. "He just stayed," Lucy said. "He sat on our porch every day, even when I cried, even when I didn't want anyone to look at me." She took a breath. "And that's why I'm not scared anymore." Elijah said nothing, but his hand moved closer to hers. Inside the house, Donna worked, quietly with volunteers, organizing art supplies, coordinating visits from therapists, making sure the pantry was always stocked. Nate, who still wore the badge but spent more time here now, helped install a new ramp along the side of the house and made sure every light worked, every lock clicked safely shut. Thor wasn't there physically anymore. Age had caught up to him not long after Lucy found her voice again. His final days were peaceful, spent under his favorite tree in the backyard. He passed with his head resting on Lucy's foot, sunlight falling across his fur like a warm goodbye. But in a way, Thor had never left. His collar still hung by the front door. Every child who came through Thor's porch was invited to touch it. Some kissed it, some just stared. And every single one of them asked the same thing eventually. Was he real? Yes, he was real. He had saved a girl not just from a man, but from a silence that could have lasted forever. Lucy knew that silence. And now she helped others break through it. One afternoon, a group of visitors came by, a city councilwoman, a local news crew, even a few donors who usually only gave money and stayed behind the curtain. They expected speeches, a tour, maybe a short presentation. Instead, they found a group of kids sitting barefoot on the porch, listening to a girl with a sketchbook talk about a dog who never said a word. "He didn't talk," Lucy told them, holding up a picture of Thor one more time. "But he stayed. That's why I'm here. That's why this house exists." A silence fell over the adults. The councilwoman wiped her eyes. The next week, the town granted permanent status to Thor's porch, ensuring it would stay open for years to come. Outside the house, that same porch kept welcoming people. New faces, new stories. But one thing remained constant. Every evening someone would place a small dog treat on the railing. Not for any living dog, but for the memory of the one who listened without words, the one who stayed, the one who taught them that healing doesn't begin with noise, but with presence. And now, as the sun sets over Maple Glen and the porch light flickers on one by one across the street, a new child arrives, clutching a tattered blanket. Inside, Lucy smiles and says, "Come sit. I'll tell you a story." Because sometimes that's all it takes to begin again. Now let me ask you, what about you? Has a dog ever stayed with you when no one else did? If this story moved you, if you believe in loyalty, in healing, in the quiet power of a good dog, please subscribe to our channel. Share this story. Let more people know what German shepherds like Thor are truly capable of. Because not all heroes wear capes, some just wait on the porch.